Welcome, viewers. You're watching us here in Scope, and I'm Waqar Rizvi. We're going to discuss in our first segment in today's show Jordan and Israel's peace treaty, which the Jordanian Prime Minister says may be at risk because of Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan as presented to try to resolve the situation in the occupied territories between Israel and Palestine. The Jordanian Prime Minister, Waqar Rizvi, is saying that the declaration at this point in time that came without any notification to even Jordan, even though Jordan is mentioned in some regards within this deal as well. The Prime Minister saying that Jordan is not willing to sell out, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, of course, his words, the Palestinian cause for a couple of good deals, really. Now, we know, of course, in 1994, that is, when the King Hussein of Jordan and the Israeli Prime Minister at that time, Isaac Rabin, signed that deal that was seen as a landmark deal. It was seen as extremely important for Israel, especially at that time, to have this sort of a peace treaty. Is it really at risk at this point in time? Let's discuss that a bit further. We're now joined by Daoud, Kuttab, who is a journalist and columnist. He's joining us now from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Also joining us from the Jordanian capital is Hasan Almomani, who is an associate professor of international relations and conflict management at Prince Hussein bin Abdullah II School of International Studies at the University of Jordan. Hasan and Daoud, thank you both for your time today. Hasan, let me start with you. What do you make of the Prime Minister Rizvi's statement there in that interview? Do you think Jordan has legitimate concerns about this deal?
First of all, good day for you and for your guest. Well, of course, what Rizvi actually has said is a sort of a continuation to what His Majesty actually expressed in many times and in many occasions related to the Palestinian question and the firm Jordanian position, and in particular related to the American peace proposal, I would call it in that respect. Of course, Jordan has a legitimate concern. First of all, the Palestinian question has been always a priority for Jordan. It's a domestic as well as a foreign policy issue. It touches the national interest of Jordan in that respect. And of course, you would need to take into consideration the geopolitical complexity of Jordan when it comes to the Palestinian question. In the sense, Jordan is the party that is most close, actually, to the Palestinian question, taking into consideration political, geographical, social proximity. And Jordan has been active engagement in the Palestinian question, officially since 1948, even before 1948, I would say, since the declaration of Balfour. So what the Prime Minister actually clearly stated reflected a clear Jordanian position in that respect, when it comes to the final or hammering out a settlement for the Palestinian question. It concerns Jordan so much when it comes to Jerusalem, when it comes to refugees, when it comes to the border and that sort of thing. In addition, actually, Jordan has always advocated a just and, of course, an agreed-upon solution that would result in a viable Palestinian state on the 4th of June, line. And, of course, the Palestinian issue, the Jerusalem issue, particularly, holy sites for Muslims, for example, has been also a priority for Jordan. And Jordan is, the custodian, or the Jordan and the Hashemite, have been both actually the custodian of the holy sites in that respect. And even Israel itself actually recognized that in the Jordanian Peace Treaty of 1994. So what the Americans and the Israelis doing are actually, they are trying to deconstruct actually the legitimate narrative of the Palestinian question. And simply they are, they are trying to create facts on the ground. Those facts actually being created illegally in that respect, and disregarded what you can call it international legitimacy represented in the UN resolutions, even.
Okay, if you allow me, Hasan, I wanted to continue and just bring in Daoud as well into this. Daoud, do you think alarm bells might be going off in Washington hearing this sort of a statement coming from the Jordanian Prime Minister? I mean, there was a response to this interview, and the White House said, listen, we value the partnership with Jordan, etc. Do you think that they will take this sort of thing seriously? Because this peace treaty, for example, between Jordan and Israel is an extremely important one, even for the Americans to keep going, right?
There's no doubt that there's a strategic issue here involved, and you are absolutely right that the Americans and the international community must take the strategic issue in consideration. Let me take you back, as Dr. Hasan said, to the 1994 agreement. That Jordan-Israel agreement was only signed after the Oslo Accords. And this is not a coincidence. The Jordanians waited until there was a Palestinian-Israeli memorandum of understanding and principles before they actually signed a treaty, even though they've been under pressure since Egypt made its treaty to make a treaty like that. So Jordan very much waited until the Palestinian issue was generally resolved, or at least it was thought it was resolved at the time. And the Jordanians gave the Israelis a very big gift in that 1994 agreement. They recognized the borders between Jordan and Israel. Now, normally countries take a long time before they demark the borders. It's a very, very hot issue, and it's an issue of sovereignty. So the fact is that Jordan gave Israel huge legitimacy by recognizing and demarking the borders north of the West Bank and south of the West Bank. So they left the West Bank, Jordan River area open because that was expected because of the Oslo Accords to be the natural neighbors of Jordan and Palestine. So when the Israelis in the U.S., basically Israeli written peace agreement or vision was announced 2 months ago, it really violated that agreement. It violated the Jordanian agreement because it allowed the Israelis to create Israeli territory on the Jordan River. So now Jordan will have borders, not only the demarked areas between Jordan and Israel, but they will be forced to have permanent Israelis also on the borders with the Palestinian or the future Palestinian state. So yes, the peace treaty between Jordan and Israel is definitely under a lot of pressure if this annexation issue is carried out.
Okay, so then, Hasan, what do you think happens next then? I mean, what is Jordan's next move, for example, when it comes in this regard? I mean, I'm obviously asking for you to look into a crystal ball, but at this point in time, if the Prime Minister has said this, what is the next stand? Because when the White House statement came out in response to the Prime Minister's comments and warning, it just said, listen, we spoke to all the people in the region, essentially all those parties involved. Jordan is an important player in this regard. As you said, it's the custodian of the Holy Shrine there in Jerusalem. Why wasn't Jordan consulted before this deal came out, do you think?
You know, I mean, before the revelation of the peace plan, I mean, you know, in the last 3 years, American diplomats or the team that is in charge of preparing the peace proposal has visited the region many times. You know, when you speak of Jordan-American relations, you speak of sort of a strategic relations, and contacts between the Americans and the Jordanians have been, you know, at the top level in that respect. However, you know, secrecy has been the order when it comes to the, you know, this plan. You know, before the revelation, the American administration actually pursued a high level of secrecy in that respect. However, now probably Jordan didn't know the details of that plan, but definitely when Kushner had visited, met with the Trump and other, you know, American officials, definitely they have discussed, you know, issues related to Palestinian issue and issues related to the forecasted or a potential solution in that respect, but probably the details. And by the way, the idea of Israeli annexation to the Jordanian Valley of the West Bank side, I mean, has been always there and advocated by the Israeli left in that respect. Before that, even in the 90s, the Israelis talked too much over the issue of a permanent Israeli presence in Jordan Valley in that respect. However, one need to understand one thing, you know, solving and shouldering the Palestinian question is not only sole responsibility of Jordan. You speak of the Palestinian question at 3 levels. You speak of the Palestinian Israelis, you speak of the Arab, and for Jordan, Jordan has to deal actually with such a 3 level, with the Palestinians, with the Israelis, and moreover, I mean, if you would speak of the American-Jordanian relations, the Palestinian issue is one of those issues that actually determine the relations. But don't forget that, Jordan and the United States has been in a sort of a strategic, and there are other areas. And I would assume, from the very beginning, even before the revelation of the plan, the king made it clear with his 3 no's in that respect, when it comes to refugees, when it comes to annexation, when it comes to, and Jordan is still actually expressing its firm position when it comes to a viable Palestinian question. It isn't an easy situation for Jordan, because Jordan has to take into consideration those dimensions of the Jordanian-American relations, including the Palestinian questions. And clearly the king made it that we have agreed with the Americans to differ over the Palestinian question, because at the end of the day, this peace plan is a plan that favored one side and neglected the historical rights of the Palestinians, particularly national self-determination, and deconstruct it and transform it into a demographical, economic issue, while, they totally ignored their legitimate rights.
All right, so Daoud, if I may, I wanted to bring in for more talk about just Jordan U.S. relations, because we can also talk about the annual U.S. aid that Jordan gets, right? Do you think that the Trump administration may be looking to use that as sort of, with this carrot and stick approach possibly on Jordan, and sort of just force it into bowing, for example, when it comes to this Middle East plan? And will that work?
Well, I don't think that they will use it. It's possible that they might. I think the Americans understand that Jordan is a strategic ally, not only regarding Israel and Palestine, but it's very important regarding Iraq, regarding Syria, regarding so many other issues that are of concern overall to the higher interest of the U.S. and even of Israel. So I think the Americans will be very careful not to touch it. There is an agreement. The funding is part of an agreement, a 5-year agreement that was signed by Mr. Patterson in the first year of Trump's administration. And it is signed, money comes from the Congress, not from the president. Of course, the president can slow it down or stop it, but it's unlikely that the president of the U.S. will go against the bilateral, bipartisan agreement that both Republicans and Democrats support. So I think for many reasons it's unlikely, but certainly Jordan has been very careful not to totally oppose the Americans while being very firm in their support for the Palestinian position. So I think the Jordanians can simply say, we will accept what the Palestinians accept and reject what they reject. And this has been the Arab and Islamic position, that don't ask us to accept something that the Palestinians, the people who are directly involved, do not accept. So I think they will push back and say to the Americans, get the Palestinians on board, and then we'll be happy to support it.
Very well, Daoud and Hasan, we appreciate your day and for sharing your thoughts with us on this very important topic. Viewers, do stay with us. We'll be back right after the break, continuing the discussion on this topic. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. We're continuing the discussion on that interview that the Prime Minister of Jordan had, Waqar Rizvi, about the Middle East peace plan and his criticisms of it, as well as his country's concerns and how this will affect the treaty that it currently has with Israel. To continue the discussion, we're now joined by Nicolai Due-Gundersen, who is the author of The Privatization of Warfare. He's also a political analyst. He's joining us now from London. Joining us from Amman, Jordan, is Fawzi Samhouri, who is a writer and political analyst. He's the president of the Roots Center for Human Rights. Fawzi and Nicolai, thank you both for your time today. Let me go to you, Nicolai. What do you make of the Jordanian Prime Minister's criticisms of this deal? Because, Jordan is an important U.S. as well as really ally for Israel also in the region. What do you make of how possibly risky this could be for all of the above?
Well, I think certainly the Prime Minister's comments feed into a lot of the comments of other Arab leaders, the notion that this peace deal isn't really a peace deal for the Palestinian people or for the region. One of the issues we have to remember is that Jordan is a U.S. ally. That's quite correct. And they've also, in 1994, they signed the Israeli peace agreement in exchange for U.S. aid. Now, one of the things we're seeing, especially after the Arab Spring, we're seeing anger by a Palestinian populace towards Trump and his rhetoric regarding the Middle East. So Jordan has to tread very carefully when it comes to the so-called deal of the century. They're not happy with the way it was presented. And let's not forget, on top of that, at a time when Israel is considering expanding settlements and also expanding into Jerusalem. They're talking about building a railway network. Jordan is a country where the Hashemite ruling family used to have custodianship of holy sites in Jerusalem until 67. So there's a lot of symbolic importance here over the peace deal not providing what Palestinians want at a time when there's austerity cuts and a sort of a Palestinian majority populace in Jordan are angry. They don't want this deal. They protested against even bringing Israeli gas into the country. So, of course, a deal like this would be even worse.
So then let's talk about that date for a moment then, Nicolai, because can't the U.S. then hold this over the Jordanians and say, listen, we'll just take this aid back if you don't comply, in a sense?
Well, here we have a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they could do that, but based on my sources, they want to be careful with underfunding a geostrategic ally. On the other hand, it is for that reason we are seeing Jordan reach out to Russia. We are seeing Jordan reach out to Qatar. In fact, I believe that they hosted the Qatari emir a few days ago in the hopes of signing various investment deals. Now, Qatar is important for two reasons. Firstly, we have the blockade, and Jordan has not taken sides for or against the blockade. Secondly, when it comes to Qatar, Israel has allowed Qatar to fund Gaza. They've allowed them to reach into their deep pockets and provide funding to Gaza and that Palestinian economy. So Jordan knows that they've got money, to put it bluntly, but on top of that, by siding with Qatar, they can also say they're siding with someone who is financially assisting the Palestinians, and that can bolster Jordan's credibility for Palestinians at a time when they need it the most.
Fawzi, what your thoughts are about Prime Minister Razaz's statements there in that interview about this Middle East peace plan. He spoke about the fact that the treaty with Israel is essentially frozen at this time in some ways. Should Israel be concerned?
First of all, the peace plan, which is called the Sympathy deal, of course, it doesn't respect the international law, it doesn't respect the United Nations Charter, which is impose sanctions on any country to occupy other countries. For this, when the peace plan it comes this year, which is announced by Trump and Netanyahu, this is the one from the Jordan, from the Arabs, from the Muslims, to surrender for the principles of power, for the principle of strength. This is just a huge plan, legitimate plan. They don't respect any sort of rights of the Palestinian people, as well as they don't respect the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty signed in 1994. Because this is what is the peace plan. According, if you go deep to its articles, to its principles, it shows only not danger for the Palestinians, as it just enhanced the occupation for the Palestinian land and denied the self-determination for the Palestinian people, but also it enhanced the dangers on Jordan. And we heard last week that the Netanyahu, before 2 days before election, he said that I don't care whether the Palestinian Authority dissolve themselves or whether there is any danger from the peace treaty with Jordan. This is a danger direct treaty to Jordan. For this, any peace plan should be should be respected the Human Rights Charter, the United Nations Charter, international law, and the peace treaty with Jordan, as well as Oslo agreement which held between PLO and Israel in 1993. And in that agreement, they said that they put and they defined 5 years as a transitional period to end an occupation, while the Israeli forces, Israeli government, they didn't respect any side, any kind of their responsibilities according to the Oslo agreement. The same thing in the Jordan Peace Treaty. Also, they said that this is a part to implement the Security Council Resolution 242 as a sort of comprehensive peace with Arabs. Israeli didn't apply anything. Also, we said that Jordan has a special rule in dominating in Jerusalem and mainly on the Holy Land. Now, all the dangers is from the come of Israeli government which is also against their responsibilities and their duties according to the peace plan.
So if you allow me just come in, Fawzi. Nicolai, I wanted to ask you about this treaty then, because to me, if you have the Jordanian Prime Minister saying this, right, to international media in an interview, do you think that there is a likelihood at some level that Jordan, in the worst case scenario, would even walk away from the treaty? And if that were to happen in that hypothetical situation, what would that mean?
Well, I think right now Jordan is going to tread a careful balancing act. Let's not forget that interview we're talking about isn't just watched by Americans and Brits. It will also have been watched by people in the Arab world. Jordan will have a domestic and regional audience here as well. I do know that in response to some of the protests regarding, for example, again, the Israeli gas deal, Jordan refused to renew a 25-year lease in part of its territory that was used by Israeli farmers. Now, when that lease was up and it was not renewed, I felt that they were testing the waters, the regime, that is to say, was testing the waters to say, okay, how will people respond to this? Can we provide a situation in which there's a symbolic victory, however minor, so that Palestinians and Jordanians feel that we are standing up for ourselves? That is the kind of thing that they will be doing, perhaps instead of completely walking away from the current peace treaty. Although I do have to say that the so-called deal of the century, I don't think they're going to endorse this deal. I don't think that it would be a popular thing to do. And I also believe that King Abdullah himself is probably not very happy with Trump's management style, let's call it that, especially because when it came to things like announcing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, Abdullah was not notified. In fact, Abdullah was one of the first Arab state leaders to visit Trump after he was elected, and I do believe he tried to do that on purpose, and it seems that it had no effect. So I don't feel that the King of Jordan is very happy with Trump as U.S. leader, and he's also got a populace of Palestinian majority to watch over, and I think that he must be very careful what kind of political message is sent in his kingdom when it comes to Israel-Palestine.
Indeed. Fawzi, what do you think that the king should do? What should the Jordanian government do? Because it needs to do something, right? I mean, we've had the prime minister now make the statement, but Jordan needs to act in some way as well, shouldn't it?
I think Jordan is a solid political stand that they want any peace plan should be based on the international law, should be based in two-state solution, which is on the 1967 war, or which is enforced border of 1967 June, this prior to the attack of Israeli forces against Jordan and Syria and Egypt. Now the Jordan is very sincere about to respect its duties or its responsibilities according to the peace treaty, while this peace treaty it is now in danger due to the acts of the Israeli leaders. These Israeli leaders, they are very well known that they don't respect their signature, as well as they don't admit the United Nations resolution, whether from General Assembly or from the Security Council. For this, I think Jordan, Palestine, Arab countries, Muslim countries should unite, and they should apply a solid stand against the Israeli policy, as well as they will to make pressure on the Trump administration that Trump administration should respect the United Nations Charter, should respect the United Nations resolution, and at the same time they should also deny the results of any military attack on any other countries. This is called, if the American will remain in this, it means that they want to impose a new international regulations, which is against the United Nations Charter, and this is very dangerous on the peace and security in general world, and not only in Palestine or Jordan or the Arab region. For this, I think Jordan alone, they can't face all the dangers from Israel. While this, I think we have to try to build up a unified stand from the regional as well as from the Arab and Muslim countries and friendly countries.
Okay. That was Fawzi Samhouri speaking to us there from Amman, as well as Nicolai Due-Gundersen. We appreciate both of their time and, of course, their insight into this issue. As I've spoken to all four of our guests, quite a number of them speaking to us from Jordan itself, about the Jordanian point of view in all this, because Jordan is an important U.S. ally. It's also an important treaty partner for Israel. And for Jordan to now come out and so strongly really say that this treaty may very well be in danger, or at the very least is frozen at this point in time because of the fact that Donald Trump has released this plan without even really taking into account its own allies in the region. This doesn't bode well for the success or lack of for this plan, does it? Jordan's certainly in a very tough position. It has a population or populace that is very pro-Palestine. It's been under pressure for many, many years over this treaty to begin with. And then as gas deals and others were mentioned by all of our guests as well, all of the above really adds on more pressure, doesn't it? Domestically also upon the Jordanian king as well as his government in place right now. And now we've heard, of course, from other Muslim and Arab countries, they are against this plan also, even those who are allied to the U.S., because, again, they weren't really taken into account. And this is against international law. I mean, you look at the map, and it's not really what anybody had envisioned, I would imagine, even if it comes to the Arab peace plan or otherwise, for what those two hypothetical states of Israel-Palestine would look like in any proper peace solution. We'll keep a close eye on that, of course, here in Scope. I'll be back with my next segment after this. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment of today's show, we're going to discuss more of a humanitarian issue, really. I mean, we talk whenever it comes to Iran-U.S. relations about, the differences between those two countries. But in an era of coronavirus, which is spreading around the world, and each individual respective nation is trying to deal with it to the best of their abilities and the best of their abilities of their medical professionals, the United States has made statements, or U.S. officials, I should say, like Trump and even Pompeo have made statements saying that if Iran were to ask for help regarding how to deal with coronavirus, then we would offer it. But then the Iranian president has come out, Hasan Rouhani, saying that that's all essentially a mask of sympathy, if I might borrow a phrase that he used, saying that essentially it's a lot of those U.S. sanctions that are in place at this point in time that are hurting most the effort of Iran to be able to defeat coronavirus at this time. Now, you'll remember that it's the United States who walked away from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. Tehran at that point had sued then even Washington at the International Court of Justice. The ICJ at that time had ruled that the U.S. was obliged to lift sanctions specifically about humanitarian supplies, which would, of course, include medical supplies that would be needed, especially in such a case. Let's discuss that a bit further. We're now joined by Setareh Sadeqi, who is a PhD candidate in American Studies at the University of Tehran. She's a political analyst as well. She's joining us now from Tehran. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is James Patterson, who is a life member of the American Foreign Service Association, Republican National Committee, and a former elected official in D.C. James and Setareh, thank you both for your time today. James, let me start with you. Just before coming on air, I was actually reading an article in The Intercept, which discusses the group United Against Nuclear Iran. And this is a pressure group, as you well know, I'm sure, James, which advocates for sanctions on Iran as well as regime change, etc. And it still very much supports sanctions on Iran, even in this case of coronavirus. Does that really make sense in any regard to you?
Very unfortunately, the United States and Iran have a great sea of distrust, and it's gotten to the point where our officials don't really understand or don't know how to talk to each other because Iran has an anti-American government since 1980, and there have been very, very few times when there's been any communication between U.S. officials, State Department officials, and officials in Iran. So it's a very difficult situation when you have a country like Iran that tries to control all of its internal affairs and release very little information. And it's not a formula for constructive discussions with the United States. It was very humanitarian of President Trump to make the offer of assistance to Iran. But instead, he's gotten, and the response has not been one that's been helpful. So I think we continue to look for a way to be helpful to Iran to contain the spread of the virus in the country, and to work so that the virus does not expand outside the country.
Okay. Setareh, in your reading, has Iran rejected any American help in this regard?
Well, in the case of coronavirus and the offer coming from Trump, yes, Iran has rejected that because the first and the most effective way to help Iran at this moment would be to remove sanctions on medicines and drugs and food. And this is what is hurting Iran's health system. Otherwise, according to the World Health Organization and other UN officials' testimonies upon their visit during the coronavirus outbreak in Iran, the health system in Iran is doing very well, and the Iranian officials are taking all measures that they can and they have at their hands to combat the disease. And let's not forget that the United States is itself having a lot of problems, as you can see that a lot of presidential campaigns and slogans come regarding the health system in the U.S. because it's not meeting the demands by its own people. And how can Iranians find the offer by Trump as humanitarian when they see that even before coronavirus, their patients, especially, for example, cancer patients or patients with special needs, have been affected by U.S. sanctions. And the U.S. has previously, for multiple times, exerted pressure on Iranian people by imposing sanctions on them without showing any sympathy, as if they're not just another nation, another people. And they claim that this is to pressure the Iranian government, but the first and the foremost victims of these pressures are the Iranian people, the ordinary people who are living here and have to face with a lot of pressure in terms of medicine, in terms of food, drugs, and etc.
James, what are your thoughts on the issue of sanctions itself? Because as Setareh said, and the Iranian president said the same thing, why not lift the sanctions then? Prove yourself almost, if I may use that phrase, and play devil's advocate for a moment. Why wouldn't Trump prove himself and say, okay, we've lifted the sanction on medical supplies at the very least. Let's go with that. That would prove that, okay, the U.S. really is willing to help the Iranian people, wouldn't it?
Well, I believe that first you have to have a level of trust, and so that this discussion can take place. We're talking about sanctions that have been in place for a very long time, and President Trump is very proud of them, and hopes that they would bring some constructive negotiations, especially related to the Iranian nuclear program. But I want to point out to you that Iran, even with past U.S. administrations, has rejected aid for its people in times of great need. For instance, in 2005, when there was a serious earthquake south of Tehran, the United States offered assistance, and Iran flatly rejected it because they have very strong anti-American views. And they've had them for quite some time. And even when it comes to alleviating some of the misery of its own people, they would rather use the situation to politically embarrass the United States.
James, would it be fair to say, even from a very objective point of view, wouldn't it be fair to say that the U.S. isn't really doing in its image any favors in the Iranian people's eyes? I'm not even talking about the Iranian government. Let's just talk about the people themselves. It's not doing any favors in their eyes, really, by limiting humanitarian supplies. I mean, if we're talking about the government, sure, there are disagreements I don't want to get into right now, but that's another show altogether. We can talk about that till there's no tomorrow. But just on the issue of humanitarian supplies, how does that make sense?
President Trump offered humanitarian assistance to Iran, and they rejected it. How does that make sense?
Okay, let me put that to Setareh then. Setareh, if Iran says, listen, okay, we have these differences, and we've had these differences for a very long time with the U.S., even over the JCPOA and otherwise, why not just accept these humanitarian supplies for the good of the people?
Because it looks very fake, because it does not look, I mean, as you said, there is the issue of lack of trust. And we have been hurt so many times by the United States and its policies in the region and against Iran. How can we trust any humanitarian aid, as they call it, coming from the United States? If this is a genuine step taken by Trump, why not remove sanctions on medical supplies? If the United States cannot trust the Iranian government, okay, how does removing of sanctions on medical supplies to the country in any way hurt the U.S. and its position towards Iran? How do you expect Iranian people to trust the United States when they have been betrayed and they have been hurt several times? The U.S. has done a lot against Iranian people. It's not only sanctions on medical supplies, it's arming and training terrorist groups like MEK and funding the most barbaric terrorist groups against Iran. There's a long record, as you said. I could go and talk about that until tomorrow, and it requires totally another show to talk about all the hostilities that the U.S.
Indeed,
government
Setareh.
has done.
If you allow me to come in, Setareh, I want to go back to this just issue of the medical supplies again. Fine, if we both agree, if we all agree that, sure, the U.S. and Iran have differences, the U.S. doesn't trust Iran, Iran doesn't trust the U.S., these governments have their major differences. As I said, I don't want to go into that right now because that's not what this specific show is about. But again, going back to medical supplies, even if there is a deficit of trust, how does giving medical supplies or lifting sanctions on medical supplies change that situation in any way? I mean, what can a country do with medical supplies which would not be to the U.S.'s liking?
And in fighting the coronavirus. And Iran flatly rejected it. They're putting conditions on there that are harming their own people. So again, there has to be a discussion, a constructive discussion between Iran and the United States on what is provided, how to get it into the country. But this is not a matter that is just strictly controlled here between the U.S. and Iran on the coronavirus. As I said, going back to the earthquake in 2005, Iran flatly rejected any aid from the United States because they didn't want any relations with the United States. And so they let their own people suffer simply because they want to make political statements against the United States. And so President Trump has offered in good faith humanitarian assistance to Tehran. That should get a conversation started about what aid is needed. Right. I don't think Iran wants to admit to that because they tried to control the information at the outset, saying there was no coronavirus in Iran. So they weren't honest to their own people or to the world about the extent of the epidemic in the country.
Okay, so the clock has gotten the best of us, James. I do apologize for cutting you off. Unfortunately, the clock has gotten the best of us, but we do sincerely appreciate both yourself and Setareh for your time today. Viewers, we've tried to give you, both sides of this argument, right? These are tough discussions because, as I said, it wasn't the mission of this specific segment to talk about the differences between the two countries because those we all know about. And as I had put as well, we can talk about it till there's no tomorrow. Books can be written on that and have been. But this is an issue of humanitarian supplies. This is an issue of medical supplies. Is it not time for both or either one of these governments, which side you may stand on, to stand down, to say, listen, just on this one issue, we'll need to agree because coronavirus is, whether we like it or not limited to borders. It will spread around the world. It has already spread around the world. So if we're not working together throughout the world as a global community on this, it'll only hurt us all, regardless of our political differences. So how does it make sense then to be blocking medical supplies? How does it make sense to reject medical supplies if that is the argument that is to be believed? These are tough discussions, but these discussions need to happen ASAP if this coronavirus spread is to be controlled in any fashion around the world. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.